Hello and welcome to Rise Zion. Today I'm going to be interviewing my brother Ethan. He has a miraculous story that he'd like to share about his time serving his mission in one of three countries, either Latvia, Estonia, or Lithuania.
Yeah, so I served in the Baltic mission about 14 years ago, and the Baltic mission had, at the time, four countries: Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Belarus.
Oh,
Since
right.
then, Belarus has been naughty, and so they've been kicked out of the Baltic mission because they've sided with Russia against Ukraine. So
Oh,
Bel Belarus is no longer part of the mission, at least as far as I'm aware. So
oh, wow.
four countries, yep. And I served all my time in Latvia. I was called Latvian speaking, and so that's where I spent
All of your
all of
time.
my time.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so this story that you're going to tell us today, what date did that take place on?
It was in October of 2012. So I guess
Okay.
it's 12 years ago, not 14 years ago. Not quite that long
Oh,
ago.
okay. So 12 years ago. And
12
no
years
date,
ago.
just you know that it took place in October though.
It was October. Yep.
Okay.
I arrived in the mission in October 1st, 2012, and it was the same month I got there.
Okay. And did you happen to record that in your journal?
It was recorded.
Okay, perfect. All right. So why don't we start by just kind of getting an idea of the scene? Could you describe for us what your area was like? What is it like? The name of the city? What were some of the things that you would see as you were walking down the street?
Right. So Latvia had three cities open to Latvian speaking missionaries. The capital, Riga, is where I was serving at the time, is my first area. And we were in the, like, I think it was the southwest portion of the city. And it was nicknamed Pardagova, which means over the river, is what they nicknamed it, the area that I was serving in.
Hmm.
And the region of the town was called Imanta. The city's very interesting. It's a historical city in Europe, and you can tell kind of in circles what time period you're in. So if you're in the very center of the city, it's like it's what they call Old Town, and it's very just traditional looking European from the Dark Ages, I guess, castles
Hmm.
and old town, like old buildings, really old buildings. And then as you move out in the circle, you get into German time period when Germany had occupied Latvia. You kind of get these wooden houses and apartment buildings. And then in the very outer ring of the city, now we've kind of gone all the way out, it was the Russian portion of the city.
Hmm.
And that's where Imanta resided, where I was serving. So Imanta, or where we lived at the time that this took place, it's where the church building was. And it was very Russian heavy dominated um, population that lived there at the time.
Oh, so what was the architecture like in the Russian area?
So they called them the apartment buildings domes, is what we nicknamed it. It really just meant kind of like domiciles. So it was like houses, but they were concrete, large concrete maze-like buildings, and they all looked the same, just completely utilitarian. The dimensions of each one were exactly the same. Just imagine a gray Lego block, and that's what it looked like.
Ah, kind of what you'd expect from Russian
Hmm.
communist time period.
Very orderly, except everything looked the same. So
Huh, interesting.
mhm.
All right. So what was the weather like there?
Weather was very cool compared to, we were north, so the high temperature that we would get to was about 75 to 80. Maybe the highest high would be like an 80-degree day in the summer,
Hmm.
and then in the winter it would have been negative maybe 10 at the coldest, 20 at the coldest.
And
So we had a couple of days.
I imagine it would stay cold pretty late into the year as well,
Yep, it
being
would
so
stay
far north.
cold, and in fact it's August right now, August is when fall would basically hit in full force already. And
Hmm.
so you could definitely feel the change of weather around August, and it would be like your summer months are basically over at that point. So
Oh,
right around the
sad.
time school started. Yep.
How
Yeah, they
sad.
had maybe. Yeah, I mean they're seasonal, 4 seasons, but the summer months are definitely shorter compared to somewhere a little further south.
Hmm. All right. So on this day that this event took place, or that started, because you're saying that this took place over the course of about a month
Yeah,
or
about the course of a
thereabouts.
month.
So on the day that this story starts, what was that like?
The day this story starts. So we just getting to the mission and getting oriented a little bit to the mission field since it was my first area, first transfer, basically first week. It was fall, cold. I remember already kind of chilly and we were already wearing jackets. And we had set up a meeting because with members actually, they weren't investigators, they were members on the Vicente were their names. And we had set up a meeting to go visit them because Anda had cancer, and they wanted missionaries to go check in on them every once in a while just to see how they were doing. And because they had stopped coming to church, obviously, because she was sick and going through chemotherapy and treatments for her cancer.
Hmm. That's rough. So she had cancer. Now she was. How did you find them initially? Was it just by contacts or?
Right. So they were members.
Oh, they
So
were members.
they were members. Yes, they were
Okay.
not investigators. They were members of the church
All right.
already. Now, yeah, something to maybe to set the scene of the mission a little bit as well. We didn't quite go into this as much. Was that we were a heavily Caucasian mission, and a lot of that had to do with the at least what I assumed and what I'd been told. Maybe it was just rumors, but the mission was part of the Eastern European area. And there had been times in the past where locals, not members, but locals, so Eastern Europe would include Russia, Ukraine, Poland, the Baltic mission. The locals were very prejudiced and racist against different colored people. And
Oh,
so the mission and a lot of the area, basically the entire mission was Caucasian missionaries.
hmm.
That's important to kind of know it in this story as well. And so it's very uncommon to it happened, but it was very uncommon to have anyone other than a Caucasian missionary called to the mission.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to these, some of the European countries, some of the smaller ones, I think that it's easy for us to forget in the United States that, or I mean, not, I mean, we're very diverse, not homogenous. I think it's easy to forget how homogenous other countries are and how that can affect their culture.
Hmm. Yes, and just the history as well. They're very mm, less. I don't want to speak as a whole, but maybe and this could have changed too. I mean, it's been 12 years ago, but they're not. Especially during the Cold War, they were a little more skeptical of outsiders, for sure. That was definitely
So the Cold War
uh,
definitely influenced their way of thinking as well.
yes.
Hmm.
Now, and there were. I mean, we ran into people of other races there. They were almost always going to school and from obviously outside the country. They were not from Latvia itself. So it was very uncommon that you would find somebody of a different race that had been born and had lived in Latvia. They're very, I mean, these people have lived there basically for millennia
Hmm.
and have lived there for so long. It's just the same type of people. So
Since the Middle Ages, sometimes it sounds like,
hmm
which is like 1200s.
yeah,
That's a long time.
yep, from outside. So
All right. So
they're from the area.
how does that relate to the story?
Well, so Vicente, you can probably hear from the name, was from Mexico, which was an interesting story in of itself because they had met like in the proto like Anda and Vicente were married members. They had met through LDSdating.com, like the precursor to all the apps. They had met online and had gotten married, and Vicente had moved from Mexico to Latvia to live with his now wife and her mother.
Hmm,
Um, and they were living in this area of Imonta in the Pardaugava. So
I see. All right. So what's the meat of the story, I guess? What is the part of the story that communicates God's hand in our life?
right. So as you can imagine, I had mentioned that Anda had cancer and wasn't doing well. So within the first 2 weeks of me being there, she'd passed away from the cancer. And we, as missionaries, we were actually, this is kind of a, a very sad point of my mission as a missionary, I should say, not sad as in like, obviously it was upsetting that she had passed away. We had missed that part of sacrament meeting where they had announced it. We didn't even know that she'd passed away until another missionary called and found out and told us and was very angry with us. We had no idea. So we hadn't even for a week contacted them after she'd passed away.
Oh,
And so Vicente was very distraught, and we set up a meeting up, and we're obviously very sorry that we had missed the funeral. We'd missed basically everything. We set up a meeting to talk to him and to give him a blessing if he wanted it, and to teach him a lesson about the plan of salvation. Vicente was still fairly a recent convert to the church. I want to say it was maybe within 5 years. So he hadn't been a member for super long. And on top of that, he and his wife communicated in English. He did not speak Latvian. And so he had been living in a country without really any contact with somebody that spoke his natural born language, the Spanish. So all of the lessons that he'd been taught were in English. And for anybody who's learned a language, has served a mission, knows that it's 100% of the time better to teach somebody in their first
their
language.
yeah,
It
in their own
just there's
language.
Even if somebody considers themselves fluent, there's just something different about teaching someone in their own language. It I don't even know how to describe it, but it is a thing. So even if you're fluent, 100% fluent in the language, it's always better to teach in their natural tongue. So anyway, so this had been kind of a huge roadblock for him in this 5 years, as well as that he had never really received lessons after he'd been baptized. Never had been to church in a church setting where he'd learned the gospel or had been edified in the gospel in the way that he could really understand. So his knowledge of something that we would consider very primary, being the plan of salvation, was almost non-existent at this point in time.
Hmm.
And so we had set up a meeting to meet with him, express our condolences, give him a blessing, and then hopefully offer him some comfort through teaching him about the plan of salvation. So we went and gave this lesson to him, and you could just see in his eyes he was not understanding what we were saying. Just he kept asking questions, and we kept repeating ourselves, and you can just tell when somebody's not understanding. And
Hmm.
and so we left that meeting feeling r- really disappointed and confused a little bit as well, because as a missionary you're trying to express your the love of God for these members, and we just felt that we hadn't accomplished that. Now comes kind of the miraculous point of the story, where I was talking about how really we didn't have any missionaries that had been called to serve in Latvia other than Caucasian missionaries. And my group, when we'd gotten there, we had one sister. Well, she's a transfer before me, who was from New York, and I don't know what country she was from, but she was Hispanic, and that was her first language. And just the chances of her being in our same area, and she was Russian speaking, so she wasn't like in our same district, but she was in the same area. Our mission was kind of funky that way, where they overlapped depending on languages. She happened to be in the same area that we needed her to be in, and she'd been called to be in that area where Vicente was. There was one other missionary in the mission who spoke Spanish fluently as their first language, and then the other was her. It
Mm.
just the chances of our president calling her that same transfer to be in an area where Vicente was just there's just no way besides divine intervention that that would have happened. And so we used her as a resource, set up a lesson with Vicente and her and her companion, and we taught him the plan of salvation again, but this time in Spanish. It was probably the only Spanish lesson she'd ever taught in her mission, but she
Mm.
was right exactly where she needed to be at and in the place that she needed to be, time and place. It just there's just no other way than to know than to explain it through divine intervention and our president being inspired to call her to that area at that time.
Oh, that's really cool. So, how do you think that affected him? What was his reaction?
Well, obviously we could tell after the lesson had happened that he actually understood it. He was much more comfortable talking in Spanish than he was in English. During the lesson, you could just tell he was so much more involved. He was asking more questions. You could see kind of a light of understanding entering his eyes. And I remember he was crying at the end of the lesson, and it was just peace and comfort that he needed to hear from somebody that nobody else was able to give him at that point in our mission.
Hmm, that's neat. I think that, well, how did this, I guess, improve your testimony of a revelation, I guess?
Yeah, just by knowing that the mission presidents are called of God and are given authority to dictate and to lead their missions. It really solidified my respect for my president,
Hmm.
and to know that he was a tool in the hands of God and directing the missionary work.
Hmm.
I never doubted him after that, ever. I never did before, but I mean, this was my first transfer. And so just to have that as my footing, to know that he was receiving revelation for us, just intensified my resolve to do what he asked us to do.
Oh, that's good. So she was like you said that she was the one person in the mission who spoke Spanish?
She was one of two.
One of
One of
two.
two. Hmm. Yep, the other one was a Lithuanian sister. So in our entire mission, she was the only one that could have been in that area at that time, because they wouldn't have called a Lithuanian sister to serve in a Lithuanian speaking sister
Hmm.
to serve in Latvia. So she was the only missionary at the time who could have been called to that area.
That's a good testimony of the importance of having leaders with the priesthood. I guess we could try to explain a little bit about the importance of priesthood and priesthood keys in our faith, and why that's something that we think matters. One of the things that we have in our faith is something that is called priesthood and priesthood keys. And basically, we have leaders in the mission. We have sort of a hierarchy set up to where we have the mission president and we have all that area under him, and he's responsible for that area. The priesthood is something that all worthy males are supposed to have, but the priesthood keys allow or enable us to exercise certain rights and certain powers, I guess you could say, within our callings. So, for example, if the mission president had the keys to be the mission president of that area, then he has I guess, the authority of God to work in that area. I'm trying to explain it in a simple way.
Right. He has stewardship is
Yeah,
to
stewardship is a good word. Yeah,
direct the work in that area over members and missionaries. So
yeah,
not members necessarily, but investigators, we can
yes.
say. In my mission, it was actually a little bit different because he was also in charge of the members almost as a stake president, because we had
Mm,
no stakes in my mission. And so he was one of the very few high priests that was even in the area. We had one other who was a 70 member, but in the structure and hierarchy, I guess, of our church, he was almost the sole high priest. And so he was also in charge of of calling the district president and organizing the church as well, which is fairly uncommon in the world, I would say.
No. So he was able to use those keys, that priesthood authority, to receive divine revelation that was able to help Vicente overcome this horrible tragedy that had occurred in his life.
Right. And obviously, like mission presidents, have a lot of things on their minds. They don't know every single person that's in the area. And so that's kind of where God came in, where my president's kind of, like I said, a worthy tool in the hands of God. And listening to God, he knows exactly where this sister needed to be when she arrived in the mission.
Right? But he wasn't aware of this happening. It just
Well, he
that's
may have been
important
aware that the member had died, but
as
at
far as
some point, but
Vicente,
right, but when the sister was called, he wouldn't have known.
right? That this individual named Vicente needed somebody to speak Spanish. That wasn't something that he would have known the details of. Hmm.
Mhm.
That's
But
really
he would
interesting.
he would have felt that this sister needed to serve in that area at that time. So
Yeah. That was something that that was interesting too from my mission, is that I had the opportunity to work in the mission offices for a brief time, and you could see the mission president had this huge board in his office of all the missionaries. We had so many missionaries, but he had this board with all of our photos, and that was how he received revelation. Was he would place them in the areas where they needed to be and put them next to their mission companion in their photos. I don't know if if you were able to see how your mission president did that.
I didn't. They did it in their apartment. I'm pretty sure it was the same though. They had pictures and the areas,
Yeah, so that's a
or at
common
least
thing. I think, like, when I know that it's very common. I mean, it's the standard. It's not like not only common, it's the standard that mission presidents pray to receive revelation for where their missionaries are supposed to be and who their companion is.
yep. And this was definitely a time when that was shown, at least to me. So there's
Awesome.
just no other way that could have happened beside apart from revelation or sheer luck. But I don't believe it was just luck.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
So,
Goes. Well, I was just gonna say, it goes to show as well that this is just, you can view this Vicente as like the one sheep that God is fully aware of, even though the world's full of billions of people. Like
yeah.
at that point in time, God was aware exactly of what Vicente needed and was able to, you know, give revelation to the mission president. And then also there was a sister missionary who had chosen to serve a mission and who was a willing servant as well to
Mm.
be in the right place at the right time.
It's like this chain of revelation. So she had to be willing to even serve a mission in the first place. And then through this chain of events, it just happened that she was in the right place at the right time.
Yep, for this one individual. So it just goes to show as well that God is just, he is very aware of every single person.
Yeah. It's playing 4D chess.
Yeah.
In the future, he knows exactly what's going to happen. Well, that's a good story. Is there any closing remark?
Not really, I guess, as kind of an end to Vicente's story, he ended up leaving and going back to Mexico,
Mm,
and I guess I don't really know what happened after that, but I guess I hope and imagine that he's still an active member and going to church somewhere in Mexico.
If you have a story that you'd like to share with us, I want to hear your story as well. All of you out in the audience, if you could take some time to look up your stories in your journals, I'll leave a link
A
in the
link.
bio. You can click the link and fill out our form if you want to be a part of our show and tell your mission story about your miracles. Again, we'll ask simple questions with this form, such as your contact information, the date that the miracle took place, your mission companion, and if you're still a member of the church. I would like to know whether or not you have those details, just so that we can keep track of this, all of the stories in this database, and to ensure that they're as accurate as possible. That's why you should always record things in your journal. Make sure that you're recording your spiritual experiences in your journal because it's very easy to forget things. And we want to be as accurate as possible so we can go back and review those spiritual experiences that happened in the past when we need a boost in our faith or when we need to review the hand of God in our life.